The whisper cut through the salt-scented air of my doorway. "You don't even own a thing here." My daughter-in-law stood between two suitcases, her manicured fingers drumming against designer leather. Behind her, my son fumbled with unfamiliar keys, already making himself at home in what he assumed was his inheritance. I shifted the grocery bags, feeling the red marks deepen on my forearms, and smiled. They had no idea about the cedar chest upstairs, or the papers that would make her tremble. The old armchair by the window, my armchair, seemed to wait patiently for justice. My name is Margaret Lowell, Maggie to those who've earned the right, and at 62, I thought I'd heard every possible variation of disrespect. 3 decades of fielding emergency dispatch calls in Harbour Point, Maine, had exposed me to humanity's worst moments. But nothing quite prepared me for the casual cruelty of hearing those words from my daughter-in-law's lips while standing in the doorway of my own home. The October wind carried the taste of approaching winter as I struggled with 4 grocery bags, the plastic handles cutting deep grooves into my forearms. I'd walked the 3 blocks from Hanson's Market because Bree had borrowed my car, again, for what she'd called a quick errand at 9 this morning. It was now past 4 in the afternoon. The front door stood ajar, unusual for this time of year when heating bills could bankrupt a widow on a fixed pension. I shouldered it open, already calling out, "Ethan! The doors—" The words died in my throat. Brianna stood in the center of my living room like she owned it, her auburn hair catching the late afternoon light that filtered through my grandmother's lace curtains. 2 large suitcases flanked her like sentinels. Designer ones, naturally, the kind with wheels that glided silently across hardwood floors. Nothing like the battered canvas bag I'd hauled to the hospital when Ethan was born. "Oh, you're back," she said, not moving to help as I struggled through the doorway. Her voice held that particular tone she'd perfected over their 4-year marriage, not quite dismissive, but weighted with an implication that my presence was merely incidental. I set the bags on the entry table with more force than necessary. Canned soup rolled dangerously close to the edge. "Where's my car?" "Ethan's parking it." She examined her nails, each one a perfect crimson oval. "We need to talk about the living arrangements." "Living arrangements." That's when she said it, stepping closer, her voice dropping to that whisper, "You don't even own a thing here." The words hung between us like a blade. Behind her, I could see she'd already moved my mail from the coffee table, stacked my library books in a corner as if they were clutter. My crossword puzzle, half finished, in pen, had disappeared entirely. Ethan chose that moment to walk in, my car keys jangling in his hand. My son, 38 years old, with his father's broad shoulders and, unfortunately, his father's weakness for beautiful, calculating women, though his father, God rest his soul, had chosen better with me. "Hey, Mum." He moved past me to the refrigerator, opening it with the casual familiarity of someone who'd never really left home. "We need to stay for a while. The apartment's getting renovated." "Renovated?" I kept my voice level, though my hands trembled as I unpacked groceries. "Since when?" "Since the pipe burst last week," Bree interjected smoothly. "The one Ethan supposedly fixed himself last spring." The accusation in her tone was unmistakable. Everything was always someone else's fault in Bree's world. "Could have called," I said, noting how she'd already colonized the coat closet. Her jackets, 3 of them, pushed my winter coat to the far end. "We did call," Ethan said, though he couldn't meet my eyes. "Left a message," I hadn't received any message. My phone, ancient by Bree's standards, but perfectly functional, showed no missed calls. But arguing would be pointless. They were already here, already unpacking their lives into my space. Just a few days, Ethan added, finally looking at me with those grey eyes that once gazed up at me with complete trust. Week, at most. Bree's laptop was already set up on my dining table, its cord snaking across to the outlet I used for my reading lamp. Her cosmetics bag sat on the sideboard, unzipped and spilling out bottles worth more than my monthly grocery budget. This wasn't the setup of someone planning to stay a week. "You can take the guest room," I said firmly. "The one on the left." "Actually." Bree's smile was sharp as winter ice. "We thought we'd take the master. You barely use all that space. And with Ethan's back problems—" "No." The word came out harder than intended. They both looked at me, surprised. I'd always accommodated, always made room, always said yes. But something about that whisper, that casual dismissal of my existence in my own home, had awakened something I'd buried with my husband 5 years ago. "The guest room," I repeated. "Or find a hotel." The silence stretched taut. The wall clock, the one my mother had given me as a wedding gift, ticked steadily, marking seconds of this new reality. Outside, a seagull cried, harsh and mocking. Bree's fingers drummed once against her thigh, calculating. Then she shrugged, as if it didn't matter, though I caught the flash of something dangerous in her eyes. "Fine. The guest room. For now." Those last 2 words were a promise or a threat. As I watched them wheel their silent suitcases down my hallway, I knew this was just the beginning. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan wobbled in its familiar rhythm, but everything else felt wrong. Down the hall, I could hear them moving around the guest room at 2:30 in the morning, drawers opening and closing. Bree's voice carrying through the walls, though I couldn't make out the words. Just the tone. Insistent. Planning. I lay there cataloguing the invasions, both past and present. This wasn't the first time they'd assumed my life was theirs for the taking. 6 months ago, they'd dropped off their designer dog, a neurotic Pomeranian named Princess, for just a weekend that stretched into 3 weeks while they went to Cabo. The dog had destroyed my garden, the one I'd planted with Tom's favourite roses. They'd never apologised, just laughed about Princess's spirit. Before that, it was their financial documents. "Can you just hold on to these?" "Mum, your filing system is so organised." My filing system. As if 30 years of maintaining meticulous records was a quirk they could exploit. When the IRS had questions about their creative tax returns, guess whose doorbell they rang? And the fights. God, the fights. Twice in the past year. Bree had shown up at my door after midnight, mascara streaming, demanding sanctuary from whatever argument had erupted. I'd made up the couch, brewed tea, listened to her version of events until dawn. Ethan would arrive the next morning, sheepish and apologetic, and they'd reconcile in my living room while I made breakfast for them both. Not once had either asked how these midnight dramas affected me. Not once had they considered that a widow living alone might be startled by pounding on her door in the darkness. I rose at 5, my usual time, and found Bree already in my kitchen. She'd rearranged the counters. My coffee maker, a simple Mr. Coffee that had served me faithfully for a decade, had been pushed aside for her espresso machine, a gleaming monstrosity that looked like it belonged in a spaceship. "Where's my coffee maker?" She didn't look up from her phone. In the pantry. This makes better coffee. I retrieved my machine, set it up on the small counter by the window. My spot. As the familiar gurgle filled the kitchen, I noticed other changes. My cookbooks, collected over 40 years of marriage and widowhood, had been relocated to make room for Bree's protein powders and supplements. The photograph of Tom and me at Ethan's college graduation, relocated to accommodate a diffuser spreading lavender oil through air that had been perfectly fine, unscented. "You can't just rearrange my things," I said quietly. She finally looked up, one perfectly sculpted eyebrow arching. "I thought you'd appreciate the help. This place could use some updating." This place? My home. The house Tom and I had saved for, where we'd raised our son, where I'd nursed my husband through his final months. This place that held 38 years of memories in its walls. "I don't need help." "Sure," she said, returning to her phone. "That's why you're still sitting in that old armchair every night, staring at the harbour like you're waiting for something." The armchair. Tom's chair. Though I'd claimed it after he passed. It sat by the front window, worn velvet arms that knew the shape of my elbows, a depression in the seat that fit me perfectly. It was where I read, where I did crosswords, where I watched the harbour change with the seasons. It was mine in a way nothing else quite was anymore. That afternoon, while they were out, in my car again, I found Bree's luggage tags still attached to the suitcases. The dates showed they'd flown back from Miami 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks? Their apartment pipe hadn't burst last week. They'd been planning this move for a while. I sat in my armchair with this knowledge, watching the harbour as accused. A lobster boat was heading out despite the choppy water, its captain either brave or desperate. I understood both feelings. When they returned, Ethan was carrying shopping bags. "Got some groceries, Mum?" Figured we'd contribute. I looked at the bags. Organic everything. Brands I'd never buy. Foods I didn't eat. Contributing. As if this were a commune and not my home. "That's thoughtful," I managed, though the words tasted bitter. Bree had already started unpacking, filling my refrigerator with their contributions, pushing my simple foods, the soup, the sandwich meat, the leftover casserole, to the back. "We'll cook tonight," she announced. "Something healthy for a change." For a change. As if my cooking, the meals that had nourished this family for decades, were somehow deficient. That evening, as they prepared their healthy meal, quinoa, something with ingredients I couldn't pronounce, I sat in my armchair and really looked at my son. When had he become this stranger who couldn't meet my eyes? When had he chosen her narrative over our history? "Mom," he said suddenly, standing in the doorway. "About the renovation. It might take longer than a week." Of course it would. "How long?" He shrugged, that gesture I recognized from his teenage years when he'd broken curfew. "Maybe a month? Maybe 2? 2 months. In my home. With a woman who whispered that I owned nothing here." I gripped the arms of my chair, feeling the worn velvet against my palms, and made a decision. Tomorrow. I would open Tom's cedar chest. Tomorrow. I would remember who really owned this place. The cedar chest sat in the corner of my bedroom closet, behind winter coats that still smelled faintly of Tom's pipe tobacco. I hadn't opened it in 2 years, maybe 3. Grief has a way of making certain objects untouchable, as if disturbing them might disturb the dead. But at 6:15 in the morning, with Bree's espresso machine already shrieking in my kitchen, I knelt on the closet floor and lifted the lid. The scent hit me first. Cedar and old paper. The cologne Tom wore on special occasions. My hands trembled as I moved aside his watch, his reading glasses, the tie he'd worn to Ethan's wedding. Beneath these treasures lay the documents, organized in Tom's meticulous fashion, each folder labeled in his architect's precise handwriting. Life insurance, pension documentation, investment accounts. And there, in a thick manila envelope marked property holdings, the papers that would change everything. I spread them on the bedroom floor, morning light illuminating the legal language. Blue Harbor Holdings, LLC, established 3 years before Tom's diagnosis, when he was still clear-minded and forward-thinking. Maggie, he'd said then, holding my hands across our kitchen table, I need to make sure you're protected. Really protected. The LLC owned the building, not just our unit, but the entire building, all 12 condominiums. Tom had structured it during the conversion from apartments, when the developer needed quick sales and Tom had our retirement savings and his inheritance from his mother. We'll live in one, rent the others through the management company, he'd explained. No one needs to know we own it all. Simpler that way. The life estate documentation was even more interesting. I had the right to live here until death, plus full control over the LLC as the sole surviving member. The paperwork was ironclad, filed with the county, notarized, witnessed, indisputable. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly gathered the papers. Ethan appeared in my doorway, still in pajama pants, looking like the boy who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. You okay? Mum, heard you moving around early? Couldn't sleep, I said truthfully, sliding the documents into a folder. Your father's things. Sometimes I need to look through them. His face softened. I miss him too. Did he? Because the man I'd been married to for 38 years would never have stood by while his wife was insulted in her own home. Tom would have been appalled by that whisper, by the casual cruelty of it. Your father left things very organized, I said carefully, watching his face. All the property documentation, everything. That's good. Mum, Dad was always good with that stuff. He was already turning away, uninterested. Why would he be interested? He assumed, like Bree, that this was just a widow's small apartment, nothing more. After he left, I made 2 phone calls. The first to the county recorder's office, speaking to Patricia, whom I'd known since our kids played Little League together. Maggie Lowell. How are you? Honey. I need to verify some property records, Pat, for the LLC. Sure thing. What's the company name? 20 minutes later, Pat confirmed everything. Blue Harbor Holdings, LLC, was listed as the owner of record for the entire building. I was the sole managing member. Everything was current. Taxes paid. No liens or complications. The second call was to David Brennan, the lawyer who'd helped Tom set everything up. Now in his 70s, David still practiced part-time from his home office overlooking the harbour. Margaret. His voice was warm. I've been wondering when you'd call. You have. Tom made me promise to check in if I ever heard about anyone giving you trouble about the property. Small town, you know. Word travels. Heard your son and his wife moved in. Of course he'd heard. Harbour Point was like that. Everyone knew everyone's business. Eventually. They think it's temporary, I said. David's laugh was dry. And you're thinking it's time they learned about the LLC. I'm thinking it's time I stopped being invisible in my own home. Good. Tom would be proud. You want me to draft a formal notice? Something that makes your ownership position crystal clear? Not yet. But David, I found something else. Bree might be violating the condo association rules. If someone were running an unauthorized short-term rental, that would be a serious violation, subject to fines, possible eviction proceedings. You'd need proof. Though. Proof. I thought about Bree's laptop. Always open. Always logged in. Her calendar app that she kept displayed like a trophy. Color-coded and complex. I'll get proof, I said. That afternoon, while Bree was in the shower, a 40-minute production that drained the hot water tank, I walked past her laptop. The screen showed her email, an exchange with someone named Kyle about the Harbour Point property. The subject line, October booking confirmation. I didn't touch the computer, just took a photo with my phone. Then another of the calendar showing dates blocked out for rental with prices listed. $800 a night for their apartment while they squatted in mine. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Bree wants to have some friends over tonight. Hope that's okay. Not asking. Informing. Hope that's okay. As if my agreement was assumed. I looked at the photographs on my phone, then at the folder of LLC documents on my dresser. Tonight? Bree would host strangers in my home while collecting money for violating condo rules with her own property. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reclaiming what was mine. I texted back, of course, I'll be in my room. Let them think I was retreating. Tom always said the best foundations were built when no one was watching. Tonight, I would lay the groundwork for everything to come. The strategy came to me at 3:45 in the morning, fully formed like it had been waiting in the darkness. 3 strikes, each one precise, legal, and devastating. I sat at my small bedroom desk, the one Tom had built for me 20 years ago, and began writing it all down in the notebook I'd once used for dispatch protocols. Strike 1, legal documentation. I would need every instance recorded, not just the big violations, but the small ones too. The unauthorized entry into my bedroom when I'd gone to the store. I'd found my jewelry box moved. The borrowed stamps from my desk drawer. The mail they'd opened by accident. Each incident would be logged with date, time, and photographic evidence where possible. David Brennan had mentioned something about establishing a pattern of trespass. In Maine, unwanted guests who'd been asked to leave and refused could be legally removed. But I needed documentation. I started a new page, October 15th, 6:20 in the evening, informed B and E that master bedroom remains private. October 16th, 2:10 in the afternoon, found B's cosmetics on my bathroom counter. The beauty of legal proceedings was their indifference to emotion. Facts only. Evidence only. The law didn't care about family dynamics or hurt feelings. Strike 2. The rental fraud. This would take more finesse. I couldn't just confront Bree with what I'd seen on her computer. She'd claim I'd violated her privacy. But I could set a trap. I remembered Michael Harrigan from the property management company that handled the building's maintenance. His son had gotten into trouble a few years back, drunk driving, and I'd been the dispatcher who'd made sure the kid got to the hospital instead of jail first. Michael owed me a favor. I'd have him pose as a potential contractor, someone interested in renovating units in the building. Bree wouldn't be able to resist showing off her authority over the property. If she was bold enough to forge documents or claim ownership rights she didn't have, she'd do it with Michael recording everything. Strike 3. The HOA violations The Homeowners Association of Harbour Point condominiums met monthly. I'd never attended. Tom had always handled that. But I had every right to attend, especially as the owner of the LLC that held the majority stake in the building. The next meeting was in 10 days. I pulled out the association bylaws, a dusty binder Tom had kept in his filing cabinet. Article 7, Section 3. Short-term rentals of less than 30 days are strictly prohibited. Violations subject to fines of $500 per day and potential eviction proceedings. $800 a night she was charging for a property she wasn't supposed to be renting at all. By 5 in the morning, I had my plan mapped out like a military campaign. I even drew a timeline on graph paper, each day marked with specific tasks. Tom would have been proud. He'd always said I should have been a project manager instead of a dispatcher. The morning brought unexpected allies. I was at the mailboxes in the lobby when Sandra from 4B stopped me. "Maggie, dear, I hate to mention this, but there have been strangers coming and going from the Ethan's unit, different people every few days, with luggage. It's concerning." I kept my face neutral. Strangers. Young couples, mostly. They have key codes. I thought perhaps they were friends. But she lowered her voice. One of them asked me where the checkout procedure was posted, like it was a hotel. "Thank you for telling me. Sandra, I'll look into it." She patted my arm. "Your Tom would never have stood for such things." No, he wouldn't have. And neither would I. That afternoon, I made my call to Michael Harrigan. "Mrs. Lowell, how can I help you?" I explained what I needed. Someone to approach Bree about potential renovation work. Someone who could document any false claims she might make about property ownership or decision-making authority. "She's been telling people she owns units in the building." His voice was shocked. "That's what I need to verify. Michael, legally, with recordings if possible." Massachusetts is a two-party consent state for recordings, but Maine is one party. If I'm part of the conversation, I can record it legally. He paused. "When do you want me to make contact?" "Give it 2 days. Make it seem organic. Maybe run into her at the coffee shop by the marina. She's there every morning at 9:30 for her oat milk latte." "Consider it done. And Mrs. Lowell, my boy's doing well now, 2 years sober. He still talks about how you made sure he got help that night instead of just getting processed." "I'm glad, Michael." After the call, I found Ethan in the living room, working on his laptop, alone, for once. "Where's Bree?" "Yoga class." He didn't look up. "Mom, about last night. I'm sorry if the friends were too loud." "They were fine." They'd left at 11:45, speaking in hushed voices about what a charming rental it was. "Ethan, how long has your apartment really been under renovation?" His fingers stilled on the keyboard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know you've been back from Miami for 3 weeks. I saw the luggage tags." He finally looked at me, and for a moment, I saw shame flicker across his features. "Mum, it's complicated. Bree's been having some issues with her business. We needed to save money for a while. By renting out your apartment illegally." The color drained from his face. "You know, I know a lot of things, Ethan, including who actually owns this building." I left him there, mouth open, processing. Let him wonder what else I knew. Let him report back to Bree that her mother-in-law wasn't quite as naive as she'd assumed. That night, I heard them arguing in hushed voices. Good. Division in the enemy ranks was always helpful. Tom had taught me that through chess games: create pressure, watch them crack, then strike where they're weakest. Tomorrow, Michael would make contact. The day after, I'd file my first formal complaint with the HOA, and in 10 days, at the association meeting, everyone would know exactly who owned what in Harbour Point. The kettle whistled in the kitchen. My old kettle, not Bree's fancy electric one. I made my tea and settled into my armchair, looking out at the harbour lights. The lobster boats were coming home, riding low with their catch. I smiled. The tide was about to turn. The house rules appeared on the refrigerator at 6 in the morning, typed on my old typewriter, the one Tom had given me for our 10th anniversary. The mechanical keys had made satisfying clicks at 4:30 as I'd composed them. Each rule, a small declaration of war. Temporary guest guidelines. Quiet hours, 9 in the evening to 7 in the morning. Kitchen use by schedule, posted weekly bathroom time limits, 30 minutes maximum. Personal items to remain in designated guest areas. Common areas to be vacated by 10 in the evening. No visitors without 24 hours, notice parking street only, driveway for homeowner use. I was brewing my coffee when Bree found them. She stood in her silk pajamas, holding the paper like it might bite her. "You've got to be kidding." "House rules," I said mildly, pouring cream into my mug. "Standard for any temporary living situation?" "Ethan." Her voice pitched high, grating. He appeared, still half asleep, saw the paper, and rubbed his face. "Mum, come on." "What's unreasonable about it?" I asked, settling at the kitchen table with my coffee and newspaper. My table, my newspaper. "You said a week, maybe 2. It's been 5 days, and you've now mentioned 2 months. Boundaries are healthy." Bree crumpled the paper. "This is ridiculous. We're family. Family respects boundaries." I turned to the crossword. 7 across, unwelcome guest. 8 letters. Intruder. Perfect. She stormed out, leaving Ethan standing there. He smoothed out the crumpled rules, reading them again. "The bathroom thing is harsh. Mum? Your wife's 45-minute showers are harsh on my water bill. We'll pay. That's not the point." I looked up at him. "This is my home. Ethan. Mine. I'm asking for basic courtesy." He left without answering, but I noticed he posted the smoothed rules back on the refrigerator. By noon, the psychological warfare had escalated. Bree had moved my armchair 6 inches to the left to accommodate a side table she'd brought from their apartment. 6 inches. Such a small thing, but we both knew what it meant. I moved it back. She shifted my books on the shelf, organizing them by color instead of author. I returned them to alphabetical order. She replaced my dish soap with her organic brand. I put mine back and placed hers under the sink. The kettle. That became our Waterloo. My old copper kettle that whistled versus her electric variable temperature model. Every morning at 5:45, I'd start my kettle. Every morning at 6, she'd unplug it and plug in hers. "Your kettle is inefficient," she said on day 3 of the battle. "My kettle works perfectly." "It's literally from the last century." "So am I. Still functioning." The wall clock ticked between us. Tom's mother's clock, inherited when she passed, keeping time for 60 years without fail. Tick, tick, tick. David Brennan called that afternoon while they were out. "Michael made contact. You're going to want to hear this recording." Bad. Worse. She claimed to be the property manager for the entire building. said she had full authority to approve renovations. She's scheduled to meet with him tomorrow at 4 to sign preliminary agreements. Perfect. Let her dig deeper. Margaret, be careful. Cornered people do desperate things. That evening proved him right. I was in my armchair, reading, when I smelled something burning, racing to the kitchen. I found one of my old recipe cards, Tom's mother's apple pie, smoking in the sink. Oh, Bree stood there, paper towel in hand. I'm so sorry, I was cleaning and it must have fallen onto the stove burner. The card was destroyed. The recipe I'd made every Thanksgiving for 38 years, written in my mother-in-law's careful script. Gone. I said nothing, simply picked up the charred remains and placed them in the trash. But my hands shook as I returned to my chair. Ethan found me there an hour later, staring at the harbour. Mum, she really is sorry. It was an accident. Was it? What's that supposed to mean? I turned to look at my son. Do you remember your dad's apple pie? How he'd always say his mother's recipe was better than any restaurant? Of course. That was the recipe card, the only copy. His face went pale. Mum, your wife has been systematically erasing me from this house since you arrived. My things moved, my routines disrupted, I stopped. No point. He'd chosen his side long ago. That's not fair. Isn't it name one time in the past year when either of you asked what I needed? Just one. He stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish. The silence stretched until it became its own answer. That night, I heard them arguing again. Ethan's voice, raised, You burned my grandmother's recipe. It was an accident. God, she's being so dramatic. It's just a recipe. It was my dad's favorite. Your dad's dead. Ethan, she needs to move on. This whole shrine thing is unhealthy. The silence that followed was deafening. At 2:15 in the morning, I found Ethan in the kitchen, staring at a beer. Couldn't sleep? I asked. She doesn't mean to be cruel, he said quietly. She just doesn't understand attachment to things. Or people. He flinched. That's not fair. Your father would be ashamed of how you've let her treat me. The words hung between us, heavy as anchors. He took a long pull from his beer. Dad always said you were stronger than you looked. He was right. What did you mean earlier about owning the building? I smiled, small and sharp. You'll find out at the HOA meeting next week. I left him there in the dark kitchen, surrounded by Bree's organic foods and specialty appliances. In my bedroom, I pulled out the destroyed recipe card and carefully taped the pieces to a new index card. The words were mostly gone, but I remembered them. 3 cups of apples, ½ cup of sugar, cinnamon, love. Tomorrow, Michael would meet with Bree. Tomorrow, she would hang herself with her own ambition, and I would watch from my armchair, my unmoved, unbowed armchair, as the tide finally turned. The Harbour Light Cafe sat perched on weathered pilings over the water, its windows fogged with October cold and kitchen steam. At 3:50 in the afternoon, I positioned myself at a corner table with clear sight lines to both the entrance and the booth where Michael would meet Bree. My tea cooled untouched as I watched the harbour, playing the part of a lonely widow killing time. Bree arrived at 4 precisely, her heels clicking against the worn wooden floors. She'd dressed for the part, blazer, portfolio, hair twisted into what she probably thought looked professional. She chose the booth Michael had suggested, the one beneath the painted mermaid that Tom had always said looked seasick. Michael entered 5 minutes later, perfectly casual in contractor's clothes. His phone, I knew, was already recording in his chest pocket. Mrs. Carr. He extended his hand. Michael Harrigan, Harrigan Construction. Please, call me Bree. That practiced smile, the one that never reached her eyes. I understand you're interested in renovation opportunities in Harbour Point condominiums. I stirred my tea, angling my phone to catch their reflection in the window. That's right. Beautiful building. Historic. I heard through the grapevine that you're the person to talk to about properties there. She leaned forward, conspiratorial. Well, I do have significant influence over multiple units. My husband and I are primary stakeholders. Primary stakeholders. I nearly laughed. How many units are we talking about? Michael pulled out a notebook. All business. We directly control 3 units currently, with plans to acquire more. The lies flowed like water. I handle all the management decisions. And you have the authority to approve renovations. Absolutely. She opened her portfolio, pulling out documents. From my angle, I could see they were generic renovation plans, probably downloaded from the internet. I can fast-track approvals, skip the usual HOA red tape. Michael studied the papers. The HOA doesn't need to approve. I have arrangements with the board president. She smiled, that sharp winter smile. Let's say she's very accommodating to family. My grip tightened on my teacup. The board president was Sandra from 4B, who barely knew Bree existed. What about permits, the building's historic designation? I handle all of that? Bree waved dismissively. I've been managing properties for years. The city knows me well. Another lie. She'd never managed anything but her Instagram account and Ethan's patients. And the current unit under renovation, that's yours. One of ours, yes. We're converting it to a luxury rental. Very profitable. $800 a night in season? The HOA allows short-term rentals. She laughed, bright and false. Like I said, I have arrangements. Rules are flexible when you know the right people. Michael made notes. And if I wanted to start immediately, this week, I could make that happen. She pulled out her phone, checking her calendar with theatrical importance. I could even waive some of the usual deposits if we signed today. You have that authority. Darling. She leaned back, confidence radiating. I own this building. Well, my husband and I do. His mother just lives in one unit. There it was. The big lie. The one that would bury her. Really, the whole building. The majority of it. His mother thinks she has some claim. But she made a dismissive gesture. Old people get confused about these things. She doesn't even understand how property transfers work. My phone vibrated. A text from David Brennan. Getting everything. This is gold. Michael continued his performance beautifully. I'd need to see some documentation. For my insurance, you understand? Of course. Bree pulled out her tablet. I can show you the management portal right now. I watched her navigate to what looked like a rental website, probably the same one she used for her illegal rentals. She'd created fake ownership documents, digital forgeries that might fool someone who didn't know better. Impressive, Michael said. And you handle all the finances. Every penny. In fact, she pulled out a signature pad. I can approve your proposal right now. Initial budget of, say, $50,000. I typically take a 10% management fee up front. $5,000. She was trying to con Michael out of $5,000 for renovations she had no authority to approve. That's very generous. Michael pretended to consider. But I should probably run this by my lawyer first. Can we meet again tomorrow? Her smile flickered. I suppose. Though I should mention I have other contractors interested. I understand. Same time tomorrow. She agreed, gathering her fake documents. As she stood to leave, she spotted me in the corner. Our eyes met. For a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw panic flash across her features. Margaret, she said, too loud. Didn't see you there. Just enjoying my tea, I replied mildly. Don't mind me. She hurried out, heels clicking faster now. Michael waited a full 5 minutes before joining me at my table. Did you get it all? He pulled out his phone, showing me the recording app. 1 hour, 12 minutes of evidence. Every word. She's in deep trouble. Mrs. Lowell. How much trouble? Fraud, attempted theft by deception, false representation. That's just the criminal side. Civil suits could include damages for the illegal rentals, the HOA violations. I sipped my cold tea, tasting victory. Send everything to David Brennan and Michael. Thank you. My pleasure. Anyone who tries to con contractors is scum in my book. And claiming you're confused? He shook his head. You're sharper than people half your age. After he left, I sat watching the harbour darken. The fishing boats were coming home, gulls wheeling overhead for scraps. My phone buzzed with messages from David, confirming receipt of the recording. Criminal charges were now possible, not just civil action. I drove home slowly, savouring the moment. In the driveway, my driveway, where Ethan's car didn't belong, I saw them through the kitchen window. Bree was gesticulating wildly while Ethan sat with his head in his hands. Good. Let them wonder what I'd heard. Let them worry about what came next. As I walked to the door, I noticed something else. My armchair had been moved again, this time turned to face away from the window, away from my view of the harbour. This time, I didn't just move it back. I dragged it closer to the window than ever before, right into the shaft of dying sunlight. Then I sat down, facing the harbour, and smiled. Tomorrow, the HOA would receive my formal complaint. Tomorrow, the board would learn about the illegal rentals. And tomorrow, Bree would learn that some things, respect, property, truth, couldn't be stolen, no matter how practiced your smile. The Harbour Point Condominium Association meeting convened at 7 p.m. in the building's common room, a space that smelled of coffee and old carpet. I arrived 15 minutes early with my folder of documents, choosing a seat where I could see everyone who entered. The October wind rattled the windows, matching my pulse. Sandra, the board president, nodded warmly as other residents filed in. The Johnsons from 2A, the Eng family from 3C, retired Judge Harrison from 6B. By 7, 11 of the 12 units were represented. Only Ethan's unit remained empty, still under renovation. At 7:05, Bree swept in, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Ethan trailing behind like a reluctant shadow. She'd done her makeup carefully, but I could see the strain underneath. Good. So glad we could make it, she announced to no one in particular, taking seats in the back row. Sandra called the meeting to order. Before we get to new business, we have a serious matter to address. Margaret Lowell has brought formal complaints regarding illegal short-term rentals in the building. Every head turned to look at me. I stood, my folder steady in my hands. Thank you, Sandra. I have evidence that Unit 7B has been operating as an illegal short-term rental for the past 3 weeks, in direct violation of Article 7, Section 3 of our bylaws. That's ridiculous. Bree's voice cut through the room. Our unit is under renovation. I opened my folder, pulling out printed screenshots. These are listings from 3 different rental platforms, advertising Unit 7B at $800 per night. Here are confirmation emails from guests, bank records showing deposits, and sworn statements from residents who've encountered strangers with luggage and key codes. I passed the papers to Sandra, who examined them with the thoroughness of someone who'd run the town library for 30 years. These are quite detailed, Sandra said slowly. Mrs. Carr, how do you explain this? Bree stood, all wounded dignity. This is obviously a misunderstanding. Maybe someone used our address by mistake. Identity theft is so common these days. Then you won't mind if we investigate further. Judge Harrison's voice carried the authority of 40 years on the bench. Of course not, Bree replied, but her hands clenched at her sides. There's more, I continued. Yesterday, Mrs. Carr met with a contractor, claiming to be the property manager for the entire building. She attempted to authorize renovations and collect fees without board approval. That's a lie. Bree's mask finally cracked. You're making this up because you're jealous that Ethan loves me more than you. The room went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. I have a recording, I said quietly, pulling out my phone. Made legally by the contractor, who was concerned about potential fraud. Michael's recording filled the room, Bree's voice, clear and damning. I own this building. Well, my husband and I do. His mother just lives in one unit. Old people get confused about these things. Sandra paused the recording. Mrs. Carr, did you claim to own this building? It was a misunderstanding. I meant we have influence. You said you own it. Judge Harrison interrupted. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a lie. Furthermore, I continued, feeling the tide fully turned now. She attempted to collect $5,000 in management fees for approvals she had no authority to grant. That's fraud. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Mrs. Johnson actually gasped. This is insane. Bree turned to Ethan. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Ethan stood slowly, and for a moment, I thought he might defend her. Then he spoke, voice hollow. Bree, you told me the rental thing was cleared with the board. You said Mom knew. You weren't supposed to. She faltered. There's one more matter, I said, pulling out the final document. The question of actual ownership. Bree laughed, high and sharp. Finally. Yes. Let's talk about that. This old woman thinks she owns things just because her dead husband left her a life estate. But that's just residency, not ownership. You don't even own a thing here. There it was. The whisper made public. The accusation that had started everything. I smiled. The kind of smile Tom would have recognized from our chess games. Checkmate incoming. Actually, I do own things here. Quite a lot. In fact, I handed Sandra the LLC documents. Blue Harbor Holdings, LLC owns this entire building, all 12 units. I am the sole managing member of that LLC. The silence was complete. Bree's face went white, then red, then white again. Sandra examined the papers, her librarian's eye catching every detail. These are... Margaret, you own the whole building. My late husband structured it this way for tax purposes. We've never advertised it, preferring to work through the management company. But yes, I own every unit, including 7B. That's impossible, Bree whispered. County records are public, Judge Harrison said, pulling out his phone. Let me just... Yes. Blue Harbor Holdings, LLC. Sole member. Margaret Louise Lowell. Bree sank into her chair like a deflated balloon. Given these violations, Sandra said, her voice formal now, I move that we issue immediate cease and desist orders for all rental activities in Unit 7B, with fines of $500 per day for the past 3 weeks of violations. Seconded, said Judge Harrison. All in favor. Every hand raised except Ethan's and Bree's. Motion carried. Additionally, Mrs. Carr, you are hereby banned from representing yourself as having any authority in this building. Any further fraudulent claims will be reported to the police. This brings us to another matter, I said, standing again. As owner of Unit 7B through the LLC, I'm issuing a formal notice of lease termination for violations of rental terms. You have 24 hours to vacate. You can't do that. Bree shot to her feet. Ethan is your son. And Ethan can discuss alternate arrangements with me, privately. You, however, are no longer welcome in any property I own. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Officer Daniel Murphy entered, young Danny Murphy, whose mother I'd worked with for 20 years at Dispatch. Evening, folks. We received a call about potential fraud and trespassing. Right here, Danny, I said, handing him a folder. Mrs. Carr has been unlawfully residing in my property after being asked to leave. She's also committed fraud, attempting to collect money under false pretenses. Danny reviewed the documents, his expression growing serious. Mrs. Carr, I'm going to need you to come to the station to answer some questions. This is insane, Ethan. Do something. But Ethan just stood there, staring at me with something like awe. Or maybe it was just recognition, seeing his mother clearly for the first time in years. Ma'am, Danny said firmly, you can come voluntarily, or I can arrest you now. Bree looked around the room, finding no sympathy in any face. Even Ethan had turned away. I'll come, she said finally, her voice small. As Danny escorted her out, she turned back one last time. You planned this whole thing. I met her gaze steadily. You're right. I don't own just a thing here. I own everything here. And you don't even own an apology. The door closed behind them with a decisive click. The common room emptied slowly after Danny led Bree away, residents murmuring in small clusters about the evening's revelations. Sandra pressed my hand warmly before leaving. Judge Harrison nodded with what might have been approval. Only Ethan and I remained, facing each other across the worn carpet like strangers. You own everything, he said finally, his voice flat with shock. Your father was a smart man. He wanted to ensure I'd never be vulnerable. All this time, why didn't you tell me? I studied my son's face, searching for the boy who'd once trusted me completely. Would it have changed anything? Would you have stood up for me when she whispered that I owned nothing, when she burned your grandmother's recipe, when she moved my chair? He flinched at each accusation. Mom, let's go home, Ethan. We have packing to do. The walk to my unit felt like a funeral procession. Inside, Bree's possessions lay scattered like evidence of an invasion, her espresso machine gleaming on my counter, her silk scarves draped over my couch, her supplements crowding my simple medicines in the bathroom cabinet. Ethan stood in the doorway of the guest room, staring at the designer suitcases. She really did it all, didn't she? The rentals, the fraud, the lies. Yes. How long have you known? About the rentals, 3 days. About her nature. Since the day you introduced us. I moved to the kitchen, automatically filling the kettle, my kettle. She looked at me like I was already a ghost, just waiting for me to fade away completely. She's not a bad person. Stop. I turned to face him. She is exactly who she's chosen to be. The question is, who are you choosing to be? He slumped against the wall. I don't know anymore. Then let me tell you what I know. I am Margaret Louise Lowell. I am 62 years old. I own this building and everything in it. I raised you, nursed your father through cancer, and worked 30 years serving this community. I exist. Ethan, I matter. And I will not be erased from my own life by anyone, including you. The kettle whistled. I made tea while Ethan began packing Bree's things, folding each designer piece with mechanical precision. At 9:45, his phone rang. Bree's voice, tinny through the speaker, filled the kitchen. They're keeping me overnight. They're actually charging me with fraud. Ethan, you have to get me a lawyer. I'll handle it, he said quietly, ending the call. We worked in silence until 11:30, when the suitcases stood by the door like soldiers. The apartment looked like mine again, simple, uncluttered, honest. Where will you go? I asked. Hotel tonight. I'll figure out the rest tomorrow. He paused at the door. Mum, that recording, when she said you were confused, that old people don't understand. Yes. Dad would have been furious. Your father would have never let it get that far. Ethan lifted the suitcases, those expensive, silent wheels rolling across my floor one last time. At the door. He turned back. The apartment was never under renovation. Was it? No. We were broke. Bree's been lying about her income for months. The rentals were her solution. He shook his head. I was so desperate to believe her, to not be a failure, that I went along with everything. You're not a failure, Ethan. You're just lost. Would you consider letting me rent 7B legitimately, at market rate? I considered this, sipping my tea. Ask me in 6 months, after the divorce. How did you know? Because you're still my son, and somewhere under all her influence, you're still your father's son too. The next morning brought a blessed peace. I woke at 5, made coffee in my simple machine, and sat in my armchair watching the harbour wake up. No designer heels clicking on my floors, no 45-minute showers draining the hot water, no whispers about what I didn't own. At 8, David Brennan called. Bree took a plea deal. Fraud charges dropped in exchange for paying full restitution. The HOA fines, plus the $5,000 she tried to take from Michael. She's also banned from the property. And Ethan. Clean. He genuinely didn't know about most of it. After the call, I walked through my apartment, touching each piece of furniture like old friends. The kitchen table where Tom and I had shared 40 years of morning coffee. The bookshelf he'd built when Ethan was learning to read. The armchair where I'd kept vigil during his final months. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Thank you for not giving up on me. I didn't respond. Not yet. Trust, unlike property, couldn't be transferred with paperwork. It had to be rebuilt, slowly, carefully, one truth at a time. That evening, I made apple pie from memory, my hands remembering what the burned recipe card had held. 3 cups of apples, half cup of sugar, cinnamon, love. As it baked, filling my apartment with familiar warmth, I thought about Tom. I did it. I whispered to his photo on the mantel. I stood my ground. Outside, the harbour was calm, the boats secured for the night. Through my window, in my home, that I owned completely, I watched the lighthouse beams sweep across the water, constant and sure. I settled into my armchair, in the exact spot where it belonged, and smiled. The whispers were gone. The truth had been spoken aloud, in front of witnesses, recorded for posterity. Margaret Louise Lowell owned this place, all of it. And more importantly, I owned myself. The pie timer chimed. I rose from my chair, steady on my feet, and went to claim what was mine from the oven. Tomorrow, I might share a piece with Ethan, or I might not. After all, it was my choice to make. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about Margaret's journey. Did she go too far? Or did Bree get exactly what she deserved? Let me know what you think.